Welcome CSC 235. This is EX12, and this will be pretty much just an overview of the finished product because there's going to be multiple parts to this, and we're going to take it in smaller steps because there's a lot to do. And we're going to try to break it down as much as we can. But what I'll do right now is just show you a little example of what your finished product is going to look like, and we'll just take a quick look at the files. And if you go into e-learning or My Warren and you go to Documents and Resources and you scroll down to Bookmarks, there's a bookmark. I just put it in Web Resources, but if you click on ex12-rockPaperScissors online, you'll see a version that's online. So this is up on a server. It's up on the WCCC Graphic Web Design server, just in a folder up there. And it's just a working sample, and you could look at the code and things like that. But for now, we're just going to take a look at how it works. And let's just look at it here. It's pretty plain. It's got a white background and just some basic serif and sans serif fonts here. It says rock, paper, scissors, just so you know what it is. That's the headline. So there's a big kind of H1 up here, header up here, and it's probably made a little bit bigger because that's a pretty large headline. And then there's some steps here. It says enter your name. Now there's a box here, a text field or text input box that we could put our name in, and has a button that says submit name. So if you decide you don't want to do that, you can skip that. You don't have to put anything in here. If you hit submit name, it'll just say human, and this game will be human against the computer. Humans in red, computers in blue, and you're going to choose rock, paper, scissors, and your opponent, the computer, is going to come up with something too, but that's going to be random. So that's how you're going to be doing this. So that's why we practice the random image. Now this is going to be a lot more detailed because we're going to have to set this up, the looks of it with HTML and CSS, and then we're going to have to do all the JavaScript, and then we're going to have to anticipate some of the moves that will happen here when people click on things and buttons disappear and they appear, and what different responses are going to appear. So let me just show you what happens here. I'll put in my name, and let's just say my name is Bart for now. That'll be my name, Bart. And I'll hit submit, and all that does is it takes the name from this input text field and it puts it here. It replaces human and it puts it above here. So this is Bart, that's me. So the human is on the left side. And then I'll move on to step 2, and it says choose rock, paper, scissors. And if you're not familiar with rock, paper, scissors, there's kind of 3 of these things here, and each one can beat the other. So it's kind of a random thing there's never one you can pick that will always beat the other one. Each one can beat the other, and each one can be beat. So what we'll do is, what I try to do is I always pick rock because I just figure rock's going to crush scissors and all that. So I always feel confident with rock, even though each one has just a chance as the other of winning. And this is set up in a 2 out of 3. So you'll do 2 out of 3 before you become like the champion of that certain match. So I'm going to choose rock because that's what I usually do. So I'm going to choose rock. And now when I click the button, the rock button, it's going to put a rock here. And that's my choice. Now what's also going to happen at the same time, concurrently, it's going to put a random image there. Now the random image will be out of 3. It'll either be a rock, paper, or scissors. So they're just 3 choices that could be there. And notice it starts off, this is an image. If I grab this and move it around, it's just an image. So this image is the size of the other image. It's just a blank kind of image with a blue background, just so it shows up on the white. So that's what's going to happen now. So that'll get replaced with whatever image we put in there. So I'm going to choose rock. Okay, now once I choose rock, you can see what happens here. Some other text and a button and other text showed up at the bottom. And we could always modify this however we want. If we don't want the reset button showing up yet, we can keep that till the end. But what happened here is I chose rock. There's my rock. And they chose scissors. So I won because rock crushes scissors. So human wins. And it doesn't say Bart wins. It says human wins. It does say Bart at the end. If I win, it'll say Bart wins. But basically human is up 1-0 in this 2 out of 3 match. So, now I got to think here. See, I'm the human. I'm using my strategy here. They chose scissors. I chose rock. Maybe I'll go with rock again. And they chose paper. Now paper covers rock. Now it's tied up. So I have a choice. Go for paper. Maybe they'll come at rock. I could go for scissors, maybe they'll have paper again, or I could go with rock again and hoping that they don't come with paper again. Now, if they come up with rock, it's a stalemate, nobody wins. So I'm going to choose rock again. And they stuck with paper. because I guess they're smarter than me, and they won. So you can see it says game over, computer wins 2 out of 3, and computer wins, it says down here. So this text changed. So there's a bunch of different responses based on what happened. So not only are we showing kind of are we going to have an array of images, but we're going to have random images display here, and then we're also going to collect points so that if we win over the other. So there's a lot of different levels of complexity that's going to happen with this exercise, but it'll be a good kind of exercise to kind of work on with JavaScript and with some of the other HTML, CSS things that we're going to have to work with too. So that's what's kind of happening here. Let me just hit the reset button just so you can see what happens. So now the reset kept Bart in there, so we'll have to fix that because that should go back and say human to start. Let me just make sure. So if I refresh, it says human, but when I reset, that should go back to human instead of Bart. Although I guess it could keep it Bart if it's still me playing, but we'll check that out. These are the little things that we'll troubleshoot at the end. Now, one of the things I'm going to show you here, I'm just going to right-click here, and I'll just go to Inspect. Now I'm in Chrome right now, and when I open Inspect, it opens the inspector over here. I'll kind of move this over, and you can see this is set up so that it can get narrower. My layout gets narrower, so it's kind of semi-responsive, but it's not totally responsive yet. And if you've never used this inspect over here, it's a little complicated looking, but once you get used to it, it'll kind of help you out. And it's going to help us out right now. Now, you could use this little arrow thing up here. That'll help you select things here, or you could just click things over here and they'll select them on the screen. But I'll use this one first. I'll click on this, and I could click here. This is saying H1. And what's actually easier is probably going down these and kind of using these. So I'm going to go down here, and this first thing in body is H1. So we have an H1, that's rocks, paper, scissors. So you can see how big it is. You can see there's a little, it'll even show you all your CSS down here. When you click on it, it'll show you all the things. It'll say font family. I can see it's Cambria, Georgia. It's saying font size, which I think we have as 3M, which is like 3 times the normal default size. So there's all the CSS that we're seeing here too. There's all the the margin that's around it, whatever. I think it's just default. So that's the first part. That's the H1, and that's all in. Now if I go to body, here's body, and it's actually set to 75%. If I click on body, I can see the width is 75%. So whatever the window is, it's 3/4 of that. It's set to margin auto, which centers it. Centers the whole body, and then there's also text align center. That means that any text that's in it will also center. So that's body, and like I said, moving down, we have the H1, which is just the headline, and then we have this area, which is called submit name, or we could call it enter name. We may change some of the names here, but I think I went back and called it submit name. And this area, it's basically a div, and you're going to see a lot of divs here. HTML5, we have different areas called nav and main and aside and things like that. But before that, people use divs all the time, and that's what we're doing here because it's not a typical layout. So we're just using divs, which are basically areas of an HTML page where you could have multiple things inside there. So this is div submit name, and what's in there is there's like I can open it up and see what's in there. There's like there should be an H2 that's in there, I believe. This is actually the label for this thing, and I think I put an H2 tag on it. You can't see it here, but we'll look. I think if I go in there, I'll see there's an H2 in there that's actually part of the label. So that's a smaller headline that says enter your name, and then there's also an input type box that's in here. So this is all part of this submit name area. We don't have to look at all this right now, but that's the submit name area. Moving down, my choice, that's the human choice. So that's the one where when you pick it, it'll show you whichever one you pick, whatever image is there. And then the computer choice is on the other side. Now these are set up so that they float next to each other because they're kind of centered in the page, but one is floating next to each other. Otherwise, like if I clicked on here, if I clicked on computer choice and I went to float, I turned off float right, you'd see what happened. It would no longer float, they would just stack. So I'll put float back on. That keeps them side by side in HTML. So that's computer choice. And then moving down, we have choose buttons. And that's just an area called choose buttons, and it has this kind of H2 thing, and then it also has a bunch of buttons, 3 of them under here, and those are the ones. And notice they're a little bigger. I adjusted the point size on them, the font size a little bit, so they're a little bit bigger and easier to see than the standard button sizes. Now what happens here, if you put in your name, now I'll put in Rich here. And well, actually, before I do that, you could see this results area is blank. I'm not seeing anything here, although there's a bunch of things that say font family and font size. There's all kinds of details here, but they're all blank. That's because in HTML that there's just non-breaking spaces there. So there's spaces here, but there's no actual text yet until it's generated. So let me hit submit here. There's Rich. Now I could use my name there. Now once we start playing the game, now this time I'll choose paper. Now it's a stalemate. You can see this whole area now of results. Now it has stalemate. It has the whatever it's kind of the winning announcement to show who won that match, or not the match, but I guess that kind of that choice. So whatever choice that was, that's whoever won that one. So you could either win it, or there'll be a stalemate. You could either win, lose, or there'll be a stalemate. So there'll either be a point for computer, point for yourself, for the human, or there'll be no points if it's a stalemate. So those are the things that are in there, and it keeps track of the points. And then there's also a reset button that's in there as well, so that when we're done, you could play again, because it's just a lot of fun. So you're going to want to play a lot of times. You're going to want to keep resetting and starting over, especially if you lose. You're going to want to get a good strategy for winning this. So anyway, so that's our layout here. Notice there's just a little label, and in case you didn't know that was paper, this says paper. In case that says rock, that says scissors. So it's just little labels under here that help out as well. So that's our game. It's a simple game, but you'll see it's a lot of code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Atom. I'm going to use Atom for this, and I'll just launch Atom just from the beginning, and I'll close up all these welcome things that come up here. I don't need any of these open, and I'm just going to do File, Add Project folder, and you're going to have one called ex12. Now the one I'm going to use right now is called ex12-rockPaperScissors, because I have like a finished version in here. You'll have one that you're going to start with. It'll just be ex12, and I'll open that up for now. And also one thing, if you see this DS store in here, you can get rid of that. Sometimes I don't know if that's on Windows or if it's just on Mac, but it just contains information about like the icons and things like that. So if you see it in there, it's kind of an invisible file. You won't see it when you look at your folder, but you can get rid of it. So you can right click on here and you could delete it, and it'll ask you, are you sure? And yeah, you could get rid of it. If you leave it in there, it's not a problem either. So what you're going to have, just like the previous exercise, EX11, you're going to have rocks. You're going to have a rock, paper, and scissors. And then you're also going to have one called blank, and we're just going to use two of them for the two blank areas. So those are our images, just in an IMG folder. And then we're going to have our index file. Now yours will just be called index.html. This is called finished because it's finished. And it doesn't mean we're going to do it exactly like the way I have it, because you'll see what I mean. It's a lot of code. And if I kind of start here, there's HTML in the beginning, and I took out the CSS. I did have internal CSS, in style tags, but what I did is I pulled it out and I put it in a file called ex12.css. And what we actually do is link to it rather than just to keep things separate. And you could actually do that with the JavaScript, but for now we're going to keep the JavaScript and the HTML in the same file. But we're going to separate the CSS. We're going to put that in a separate file, and it's called ex12.css, and I already have the link in here, and I'll probably leave it in there, but this is what a link looks like to a CSS file. And when you go to the CSS file, what a CSS file basically looks like is it's basically full of selectors. Selectors can be HTML elements like body, button, input, any of these that are HTML. Now if they're not in Atom, they show them up kind of blue underlined, are HTML elements, H1s, H2s. And then you'll see a lot of these. These have pound signs and a name. Those are ID names. We're going to use a lot of ID names because they'll identify divs, and they'll also identify paragraphs and all different parts of, and fields and all kinds of things we have to work with. So there's a lot of CSS here to work with too. So this will be a kind of a bigger project. This is just the CSS. That's just to make it look like the way it should look. So there's CSS for all different parts of this. Even though it's not a very complicated layout, we also have to use IDs to identify things so that we could change names and have different text kind of display. So not all of it's just visuals. There's some little visual things. You can see some of them are just changing the color, and that's it. But there's font sizes and just some basic layout things to make it look a little bit nicer. Not that it's anything, really amazing here, but this is your CSS file. So that's basically the presentation, the look of it. Your index file that you're going to be working with, and again, it won't have an FIN, is going to be linking to your CSS, and then it's going to start the HTML, and there's going to be, there's your H1, rock, paper, scissors, and here's your divs. You have a div for submit name, a div for my choice. That's the one on the left side. That's the one that we were, this is the div for my choice. This is the div for computer choice. So when you go back and look at that, they're kind of in order here. So here's the div for computer choice. You can see there's paragraphs in here. There's images in here. Here's the div for choose buttons. That's that area that I mentioned was, these are the choose buttons. This area here, just in the black, not the red and blue part, just this area here is the choose buttons that you're actually kind of playing the game with. And these things are kind of the results down here. So I think we call this results. So it says who wins that little matchup. It also keeps track of the points, and there's also a reset button. And keep in mind, you could change it from 2 out of 3 to 5 out of 7 or whatever. You could play up to 10 and then have it end at 10 or something like that. But anyway, going back to our HTML, that's the way this is set up. So not a lot of HTML, just a couple different sections here, and a lot of IDs in there so we can identify things. You can see this last one, there's just non-breaking spaces in there, so there's no content until we actually have the JavaScript. Now the JavaScript, this one starts at line 46 and goes all the way to like line 211. So there's a lot of JavaScript here. You look at just this last function here. Look at all the things in here. And there's going to be some new JavaScript concepts. We're going to be using this kind of shortcut function with this $sign here. Basically, instead of having to write document.getElement by ID all the time, we do a little shortcut for it. We create a variable in a function and then just send the ID parameter in there so that we could shortcut all of these. Instead of saying document.getElement by ID, we just use the $sign to replace that. So if you see that and you're not used to seeing that, that's what that is. So it just helps shorten things a little bit. So we do one function, and then we could just substitute the $sign for all of those. And that's kind of similar to what jQuery does a little bit. And then we have functions for submitting the name. We have arrays set up for the images. Here's the arrays for the images. We're going to have a random number set up. And then we're going to have a lot of if-else statements because, depending on what someone chooses and how they match up, we're going to have different options for who wins. Because there's 3 different options of what people pick. So, and there may be more efficient ways to do this, but so far I think we set this up. When we did this in the past, we set it up with a function where if you choose rock, what happens? If you choose paper, what happens? And if you choose scissors, what happens? And then there's also a function that checks the points that just keeps track of things and makes sure and displays kind of your results. And then there's a reset function. So that's pretty much it. It's a lot of code here, so there'll be a lot to learn by doing this, and we're going to break it up in little steps as we go. And we'll try to do it from scratch. I don't want you to just, look at this code and copy and paste a bunch of things. You're not going to learn anything from that. So we'll try to break it down, and it may not go exactly like the way we have it here. I'll give you some of the HTML. We don't have to, type every little bit of HTML from scratch, but you should know what's going on since this is a advanced web programming class. We don't just want to skip over the HTML and skip over the CSS. So we'll take this in little steps as we build it up, but then hopefully I'll give you some opportunities to kind of troubleshoot some of these things on your own, because there will be a lot of troubleshooting. Even when I put this up, there was things that weren't working. You can see even the last thing I did, it's still what happened here? When I reset, it didn't reset the name back to human. Not that that's a big deal, but you might not even want that, but that's something I'd have to troubleshoot and go back and say, well, how do I get it back to human? And that would be in my reset function. So that's what we're going to be doing with EX12, and EX11 is kind of just a little preview of that. That one is pretty quick, but this one is going to have a lot to it. So we're going to be working on this for a little while, so I just wanted to give you a little overview before we get started on it.